anyone who doesn't know Anthony Scaramucci in a room has been living under a rock. Because no, I mean it's
Have you been living under a rock? Half a rock. Just barely knows me.
It's interesting, Anthony, and we know you in the media as the Mooch. I mean, a lot of people call you the Mooch, but many people would sort of equate you to that time in the White House, the 11 days. But actually, over the course of the last few years, when I've been listening to you, there is so much depth, there is wisdom, there's a worldview and a knowledge of what's going on in the world that I think we've been privileged enough to get access to, because not just your time in the White House, but your reflections and being able to look back on your time in a self-deprecating way and why you went in, why you did that. So perhaps we can start there. And I don't want that period to define you, but I would like to talk to you about why you chose to join Trump 1.0 and what you got out of it.
Well, first of all, you've been very generous with your opening remarks, so thank you. But I do think that period does define me. I think that when I'm dead, if there is an obituary, that'll probably be one of the top 2 or 3 lines of my obituary, no matter what happens. So that's life, and that happens in life. And when I look back on that situation, a lot of great things have happened as a result of that situation. I don't think you and I would be talking today if I didn't get fired unceremoniously from the White House like that. I went through a very difficult period in my marriage, which I've documented and talked about very openly. I think that getting fired like that gave Deirdre and I an opportunity to heal our marriage, which was obviously beneficial to both of us and our children. But I think the message from that period of time in my life is that you're making mistakes and you don't even realize at the time the mistakes that you're making, actually. And so you're doing things with intuition, and you're doing things part with the flow of things. And then there's something magical that happens, which is called your ego. Once you get your ego into the situation, forget about it, because once your ego's in, then you go on missile lock on certain things. And so for me, I hate politics. I mean, I don't even know how I have a political podcast, because I actually don't really like the politicians, and I don't like the way they treat each other. And I'm a little bit more upfront, and I could never really run for office because you have to lie to everybody. The first thing you do when you run for office, you start lying. So I've always wanted to be a business person, but I grew up in a blue collar neighborhood. And so never hit a golf ball, never swung a tennis racket, didn't really know that inside track at a country club or a prep school. I guess, I don't know what you guys would call it here, but it was public school. It was a state-sponsored school in my local hometown. And so the way into meeting people was through politics. I ended up becoming a political fundraiser. And then when I ended up on the Trump team, and I'm happy to take you through that if you want to hear all of that, but when I ended up on the Trump team, none of us, including him, thought he was going to win. None of us. We can revise history today if people want to do that. I was with Donald Trump on the 8th of November, 2016 at 6 p.m. in his office. He was getting ready to move his plane from LaGuardia to JFK to fly to Scotland. He was going to go play golf at his new golf course, and he was convinced that he was going to lose the election. So all of us were sitting there. He wins, and then you drink the power potion. You drink the ego and pride tonic. And he names me to the transition team, which I wasn't expecting. Now we have a flood of interviews that we have to do. We're trying to build a cabinet. We have 12 weeks to do it. And we're so ill prepared for it because nobody worked on the transition because nobody thought he was going to win. So now we're building the cabinet, and then he offers me a position in the White House. People don't remember this, but I was the OPL director. I was in the Office of Public Liaison. This guy, Rice Priebus, absolutely hated me, and so he did not want me to have that position. So he was doing what they do in Washington. He was like dropping bombs on me in the press and making up all these different stories. And I went to see President-elect Trump, and I said, listen, stuff he's getting written about me in the press isn't true, but he doesn't want me in the White House, and he's your chief of staff. It would be better for me not to take that job. And again, people wouldn't remember this, but I was badged to have access to the White House on January 20th. So I had the blue badge. And the president was like, you should keep the badge. I'm going to eventually have you come into the White House. And so I was going in and out of the White House with a blue badge from January 20th until the day I was officially hired as the comms director. So people don't remember that, but that's just a ancillary story because I got a lot of exposure to the White House in the first 6 months of President Trump's term, which I think prepared me to be able to articulate what I think is so dangerous about the current situation.
So I want to ask about the current situation because, you say that he didn't think, and none of you thought he was going to win that first time round. The second time round, he thought it was stolen from him, and he, ran based on that idea. Just talk to us about the difference between 1.0 versus 2.0 in terms of who he's surrounded himself with and where he's planning to take the country.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that we would have been better off with him winning the second time around. Let me just hear me out for a second. There were way more establishment Republicans around him. He would have been corralled. He would have gotten that second term out of the way. He would have not run for reelection, obviously, or forced the issue. You wouldn't have had the cloud of the insurrection. You wouldn't have had the challenge to America's election integrity. So weirdly, and again, we can't have alternative histories here, but it would have been better for the country and perhaps even the world. He had just won and we'd be on to a different president now in 2025. But the election lie, 30% of the people that live in the United States believe it. Election integrity, I think it's like 45% of the people doubt the integrity of these elections, even though they're of very high integrity. By the way, if they weren't high integrity, the establishment and the powers that be in Washington did not want Trump won. I don't think the establishment wanted Trump too. So it's just more evidence that the
system works.
The system works. There's high integrity to the system. But what also happened in that 4-year interregnum is he got dunked. And so he was in the wilderness. Kevin McCarthy went to go see him. They were talking about impeaching him. They had an opportunity to impeach him on the 7th of January up until the 20th of 2021. I mean, he was dead to rights on the premeditation of the insurrection. They caught him on tape. Mark Meadows, his chief of staff, was going to be the principal witness. And McConnell went to McCarthy and said, hey, if you get me 10% of your caucus to vote for the impeachment, I can probably get enough Republicans here to vote for the impeachment. McCarthy blanked. He wanted to be Speaker of the House more than anything. He also told people that Trump was politically dead as a result of everything that happened, which wasn't the case. And so that wilderness period for Donald Trump caused a very hard pivot away from establishment Republicans, away from anybody that had any question mark related to his behavior or his judgment.
The idea that they were guardrails and they were grown-ups in the room.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. But, I'll put it this way. The spirit animal for Trump won from the family was Jared Kushner. So he's a very sober guy. First 6 months of the Trump administration that I observed, the nickname for Jared was like a hockey goalie. He was like a goaltender. Shots were coming in from Trump that were crazy, and he was figuring out ways to block them. And I'm here to tell you that every policy that we've seen in this first 7 months of Trump 2 would have been 2018 or 2019 policies, but they were blocked by Stephen Mnuchin, General Kelly, Jared Kushner, Gary Cohn. And so spirit animal from the family, Jared Kushner. For Trump 2, the spirit animal from the family was Don Jr.
So it's Don Jr. now calling shots, and the likes of J.D. Vance.
In the setup, we're talking about the transition to, the litmus test was, are you going to let Trump be Trump? That's a big Don Jr. totem. The litmus test was, no matter what my father says and or does, are you going to follow him blindly? Are you going to be blindly loyal to him? And so Scott Bessent, his last investment letter to his hedge fund manager, limited partners, was against the tariffs. If you read the letter, he's done a great job of like bleach bitting the letter. You can't find it anywhere, but if you read the letter, it basically says that the tariffs are economically inoperable and it would cause a potential crisis or a recession in the US. Now he's out there chanting pro-tariffs. I mean, Howard Lutnick, it's probably not appropriate for television. I mean, I call him Coward Buttlick. I mean, the guy's like a disgrace. I mean, you can't imagine a guy like that who's a billionaire and a Wall Street veteran to act like that, So
You also have the likes of Steve Witkoff, a real estate guy running around in his own private jet, wheeling and dealing and trying to bring about deals, whether that's in Gaza or in Russia. How do you feel about those things?
Well, Steve Witkoff is no peace plus personal aggrandizement and personal prosperity. You know how you would want somebody like him as an envoy to have peace and prosperity? Well, he stands for no peace and personal prosperity. And so, but that's the Trump way, $3+ billion has been made this time. He couldn't pull that off the first time because he was intimidated by the job, like most people would be. Listen, I was there the night that he won, 1 o'clock in the morning. These lamps in front of us, he was as white as that lamp. He was as white as this rug. I was there. I watched it because he didn't expect to win. He then won, and then he had to build a cabinet, and he had to start to run the government. And he was saying things to us that are laughable now. And he said, "I'll never tweet again, and I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that."
Well,
Of
then
course,
he
he
had
went right into that, but I mean, he was
4
nervous.
years.
He was nervous. Okay, so the guys got together. They built this thing called Project 2025. It's a 925-page document of how to take power away from the legislative branch, how to take power away from the legislators and the judicial branch, and to strengthen the presidency, sort of create this imperial king-like presidency. 925 pages that listed everything that they were going to do from day one. And so these were the loons that attached to him. So all the establishment Republicans have either gone by the wayside or denounced him or said there's NFW, never going to work for him. And the loons came out of the woodwork and said, hey, here's a big call option. If Trump gets back into office, he can be the vessel for us to break the democracy. Did Trump do some things that were right? He's identified issues where America needed a renewal, America needed a re-engineering, but the way he's gone about it has been colossally damaging, right? So he's on the 2nd of April, he's coming down from Mount Evil, like Orange Moses with the tablet, the 10 Commandments of Tariffs. I mean, come on. Nobody could understand it. It was imbecilic. There was no way to even administer it, to the point where he had to keep rolling 90-day extensions to it. But if you said to me, hey, we have to surgically go through our trade agreements, and where the Chinese are dumping product, where their government is teaming up with their private enterprise to dump product into Europe at a below market price or a below market price in America, should the Europeans or the Americans put tariffs on those goods to protect their workers? The answer is yes. So Trump understands that. But the way he's going about it is really to draw attention to himself more than to solve the problem.
And I want to get to the global economy and where it's at and your predictions in a second. But just in terms of those two wars that we wanted to talk about, Ukraine, Gaza, do you think that he's going to be able to do anything on either of those fronts? I know you still speak to people within the administration.
Well, the biggest irony, and would have never thought this, so the podcast that I do with Caddy K, The Rest is Politics US, I'm fairly, I think, objective, but somewhat negative on the Trump administration, because I will call the balls and strikes. I'll tell you what he's done right. I'll tell you what I think he's done wrong. When he bombed Iran, I predicted that there wouldn't be this reprisal from Iran because of the way he did it. But guess what? I was getting incoming from the administration that was actually explaining it to me. So the great irony, even though I'm considered a Trump critic, which I am, the people in the administration talk to me more now because I have this very large platform. So I get a lot of interesting information that comes out of the administration. And so what I would tell you about the administration is that the economic team is in complete disarray. The economic team does not agree with the president, except for Peter Navarro. And if you remember what Elon Musk said about Peter Navarro, he said that he's as dumb as a box of rocks. And then he sent out another tweet. He said, I just like to apologize to the rocks. I probably shouldn't have said that about the rocks. It's somewhat demeaning. And so, but you see, but that's also him telling you that Trump is as dumb as a box of rocks. Like,
Do you think he's going to try and run for a third term?
I do not.
Okay, interesting.
July 20th, 2029, he's not going to be president. And there's so many different reasons, but I'll give you the big three. Amy Coney Barrett was interviewed by Brett Baer for her new book that just came out. He point blank looked at her and said, so can he run for a third term? She explicitly said, no, it's just not in the Constitution. Could he change the Constitution? If you're telling me that he decides after the midterms, hey, I want to get a 28th Amendment into the Constitution to repeal the 26th Amendment, yeah, I mean, then he could do it. But if you look at the logistics of that and the 37 states that you need and the ratification process, I think that's impossible for him. But remember, this is about ambition. This is still House of Cards like activity in Washington. And there's 50 people that think that they're the candidate to replace him on the side of the Republicans. So they'll make sure he goes.
Just briefly, just to my second question on that point, do you think that any of these people who are around him are going to last the full 3 years now?
Like who?
Hegseth, Rubio, he tends to move people around.
They'll all last until the midterms. That's my prediction. So Kennedy, Hegseth, Rubio, they'll all last until the midterms because Trump has told people privately that he doesn't want to give scalps to the liberals. He doesn't want to give scalps to the mainstream media.
The US economy post-COVID has been the envy of the world. There was a front page of The Economist last year, describing it as that. But do you now think it's at risk?
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, all he had to do, and he would never have done this, of course, but all he had to do is just keep the Biden policies in place, and the inflation was trending down, and the economy was fairly solid, and the trade imbalances have not gotten any better as a result of the tariffs. Just look at the trade deficit; it's actually gone up since the implementation of the tariffs. Also, it's been unbelievably disruptive to companies. So if you're running a company, you've got a lot of things you have to consider. Let's say that you're Rolex as an example. Well, Rolex, you're hitting them with a 39% tariff. What is Rolex going to do? They can't raise their prices. Why can't they raise their prices? They're a luxury good. And so if they go to raise their prices and somehow the tariffs go away, they can't lower their prices because that'll send a signal to people that they're using inferior product in their design. So they're forced, you talk to Rolex executives, they're forced to eat the tariffs. So that means less watch factories. That means less incremental hires. Okay, go to the United States. Guess what? We're in a fully integrated global economy. 60% of the parts and equipment that go into a Boeing aircraft come from outside the United States. We don't make any flat screens. You guys have been on aircrafts. All they have is flat screens on those aircrafts. So the prices are going up for every one of those categories. Let's say you're a lobster fisherman in Maine and you've got a 25 or 35% tariff with Canada. So now where's the processing plant for the lobster? Well, because of NAFTA or the USMCA agreement, processing plant is in Canada. So now you got to ship the lobster there to have it processed. That's 25%. Ship it back, that's 25%. Now the price at the restaurant is 50% higher. You're knocking the lobster farmers, into the ground. You're doing that to the farmers in Iowa. You're doing that to the farmers, the potato farmers all over the place in Idaho. I mean, it's been a brutal thing for the economy. So the good news for Trump is the companies have eaten a lot of the tariff costs, didn't pass them on to the consumer. The bad news is they stopped the incremental hire, they stopped the incremental capital allocation to plant and equipment in the country, and you're now seeing it in the economic data. So there's big decisions that have to be made over the next 6 to 12 months. And guess what? As Jerome Powell predicted, the tariffs have caused the inflation to creep back up. You saw the print last week; it was 2.9%. It's up around 3%. You can't be the Federal Reserve Chairman and cutting rates into 3% inflation. Can't do it. Okay, you have a 2% target, and if you look at real rates right now, building in the inflation, real rates are at about 1%, right? That's 4 minus 3. It's not a big enough spread to be cutting rates right now, yet he's getting hammered every day by Donald Trump. So Trump is impairing the businesses, but he's also impairing the market psychology. If you're telling me now that this is how the United States has been viewed the last 80 years, we've got some tribalism, there's a lot of partisan politics, but there's predictability from the establishment class. They're going to leave the Fed alone. There'll be an independence of the Fed.
Now the independence is the threat.
Okay. And so now look at the incremental capital. Look at the European stock prices, Asian stock prices relative to US stock prices. You just told me we were the envy of the world, and we're still doing better on a relative basis in terms of growth, but the incremental capital is flowing away from America because the people that are outside of America looking at allocating capital are saying, okay, America's riskier.
So you talked about, the global economy being so deeply, interconnected. What do you then see, if you were to do a prediction, the biggest threats and risks to the global economy?
Well, I mean, I think the wars and the fact that they are unending is a risk to the economy because I think it's going to have an impact on commodity prices that are exogenous, that are sometimes hard to predict. I think the tariff situation in the United States, unless it's more favorably resolved, is going to have an impact on the global economy and will obviously slow down the US economy. We have not solved for inflation in the US. And so I don't know if everybody's watching this, but gold is up 43% this year.
Why is that?
Okay. Gold is up 43% because it's viewed as a store of value and the US dollar is losing its purchasing power. Said differently, we've lost 28% of the value of a US dollar since January of 2020. Let me repeat that because I want people to understand that if you had $1 in your pocket on 2020 and you woke up in 2025, it has 72 cents worth of purchasing power. And so people know that. I think everybody in this room knows this, but it's worth repeating. Since the big, beautiful spending bill and the release of the cap on our deficit spending, which is coming now in the next week or so to an end, we spent $800 billion of deficit spending in the US. We're on track to do almost $2 trillion again this year. This is the type of deficit spending on a percentage of GDP that a country like the United States would do in a steep recession, a global financial crisis, a COVID, not in a relatively reasonably growing economy. You can't keep that going because we don't have to be mathematicians here to know that if you're borrowing money to pay the interest on the money that you borrowed, then the thing could go exponential on you. You're at 37 trillion right now. You don't want it to go exponential, right? You're already at 125% deficit to the GDP. Okay, so if you're an economic historian, you're a macro hedge fund trader, if you're looking at an economic dashboard for the United States, you're saying, whoa, they're going to devalue. They have to devalue the dollar. The debt is denominated in their own money, which is good for the United States, bad for everybody else. They're going to print more of that money. Okay, they're going to devalue in order to pay off the debt. It's confusing for the average person because inflation is this pernicious thing that people don't understand. My folks don't understand it. They didn't go to college. My parents bought their house for $16,000. If they go on Zillow, the Zestimate for the house is $750,000.
So they think it's increased.
They think they made money, but they have not made money. Now let me explain why. Because gold was $35 an ounce when my folks bought their house. That's 450 ounces of gold to purchase their house. Today with gold at 3,400, it's 250 ounces of gold. Does everybody understand that? And that would make sense because the house is 60 years old. It's got an older feel to it. It should be worth less. But don't talk to my parents about it. They think they made a fortune on the house, but they didn't because it's the purchasing power since we broke the Bretton Woods Treaty in August of 1971. $1 million of 2025 dollars is $80,000 of purchasing power in 1971. We've put a hurt on the money, which has hurt the middle class, has hurt the lower middle income people. If you can only remember one thing I've said today, inflation is a pernicious regressive tax. It's an easy way out for politicians. They tell you, oh, no, we're not taxing you, but then they crush your bank account by inflating the supply of money into the system.
And we said we'd talk about crypto. Do you think it's a threat to the dominance of the dollar?
Well, in 10 minutes, there's no way for me to describe it, but I'll say no, it's not a threat to the dominance of the dollar. The digital world of money is coming, whether people like it or they do not like it. I will submit to you that if a technology is better, the technology gets adopted. If there's a horse and a carriage, and then we see a horseless carriage, and the horse and buggy person says, oh, that's a fad, that's not going to last. Well, guess what? It lasts longer, it goes further, you adopt it. Uber, nobody wanted Uber. Nobody. You could ask the mayor, Boris Johnson was running the city at the time. No mayor in the 40 largest cities wanted Uber. Guess what? Everybody's got Uber. Why? Because it's a better technology. If I can transfer value to you without going to a third party, that's going to save the world $7 trillion. We spend $7 trillion on transaction verification. Those are credit card fees. Those are wiring fees. Those are lawyers and accountants evaluating the purchase of a piece of real estate.
What do you say to those then who say crypto, it's a scam, it's a house of cards, it's something that criminal elements can also access?
Well, the only thing I can say in 2 minutes or less, do your homework on it. I understand those buzzwords, or to slow it down, the same way a horseless carriage was a fad, and the same way the long distance phone companies did not want this pervasive internet, why we had to break up AT&T. When I was here in the UK in the 80s to call my parents, it was $3 a minute. Now I can log on to any Wi-Fi in any cafe, no dollars a minute. And so if you want things to advance in the civilization, you can listen to the buzzy propaganda against it, or you can do your homework to understand it. And I will say this, if you're Ray Dalio, a billionaire, hated crypto, now likes it. Michael Saylor, same thing. Paul Tudor Jones, same thing. I wrote a book called The Little Book of Bitcoin last year with Michael Saylor, and I said it took me 10 years to understand it. If you asked me when I first got introduced to Bitcoin, I would have said it's a scam. It's a group of cryptographic numbers on the internet. It can't be worth anything. And now I've got, I don't know, over $1.5 billion of cryptocurrencies in my hedge fund.
You often, give these words of wisdom, talk about leadership. Just if you can in a minute, I mean, what should people take away today in terms of, there's a lot of turmoil in the world. There always is. Anyone who knows history knows that this isn't, rare. But people are feeling very anxious right now about the state of the world. Just, within 30 seconds, a minute, what sort of would you tell people to think about?
I would say 3 very quick things. Do not be intimidated. If you're living in a free society, express your voice, get out there and push the public servants. Because right now, there's heavy cynicism in the world, and there's a belief that we can't change this. Do not be intimidated. Second thing I would say is there's large and small actions that you can take at a local level that can force more accountability into the system. Take those actions. And then the third thing, and perhaps the most important thing, is that the system is wrong. Something's wrong in the system. You can smell rottenness in the system. So you're going to have to get off of social media for a few minutes and start reading some history and start getting yourself in touch with what is actually really going wrong in the system before people that do not have your interests in mind take over the system that all of us have been taking for granted. Those are the 3 things.
Anthony Scaramucci, thank you so much.